Sure, but just before that, I'd like to just extend my thanks to the people who participated in the MedEd Institute, our fantastic plenary speakers and breakout session presenters, and I'd like to thank the CPD office and also the Dean for his support of the event, and special thanks to Susan Love from our office, who has been instrumental, along with other members of the CPD team, in putting on the day. So thank you to them. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Jock Murray, who I believe is known to many of us. He's a former Dean of the Faculty of Medicine and a friend of Karen's, of course, and he's going to come down and say a few words.
Well, it's a great honor and pleasure to be a participant in this particular event, because we're recognizing not only Karen's contributions, her scholarship, but also the spirit that she brought to this medical school. And it, I think, is something that a lot of us in the room remember because of her influence on all of us. She was a mentor, she was a teacher, she was a friend. And for some of us in the room, our influence goes back as far as the 1970s, when she was a nurse coordinator at Camp Hill Hospital. But even at that time was profoundly interested in the concepts of medical education. And it didn't surprise us when she went on then to do further degrees, a master's degree and a PhD in medical education. Now, during that time, her scholarship increased, but her influence on so many of us was particularly important. When we're attempting to alter in a dramatic way the medical education system of this medical school, in the late 1980s, it was Karen that we asked to lead that process. Very difficult process. And it was the only medical school in North America that made a major transformation in its medical education program on one day. Now, it took 7 years to get to that day, but it still was a process that she led, and it was one that I had great admiration and respect for what she did. She did really two things that I thought were most influential. One was, she was a mentor to so many people. And if you look at her CV, you'll notice that she had, as part of her scholarship, probably hundreds of others who participated. And very often she gave them the lead, even though she was the medical education expert. She was also an expert on educational theory, reflection, feedback, curriculum development, continuing medical education, faculty development, and so many other areas that were influential to the transformation that occurred. Now, it wasn't just here. She also had an influence at other centers, both in many faculties in Dalhousie, but also at Mount St. Vincent, at Manchester, in Malaysia, in Maastricht, and many other centers around the world. And those around the world in medical education know who Karen Mann was, because she was often a major participant in all those discussions. The thing we remember, of course, was her friendship, the fact that she influenced so many of us. Did anyone ever remember when she wasn't smiling? We always knew that her door was open. It literally was open, and no matter how busy she was, how many deadlines she had, she was always welcoming, she would always sit and talk, and she would always, I think, provide us the kind of not only advice, but the comfort that most of us needed at times. So she was a caring individual as well as a scholar. And we're not only grateful to her, but she is recognized by others for her contributions outside of this institution. And we'll see, for instance, she has been given the award from the AFMC for outstanding contribution to the faculty development. The Royal College has established a Catalyst grant for medical educational research. And today we have the establishment of the Karen Mann Lecture in Medical Education. It gives you just a brief overview of the influence of this wonderful person. So I'd like to now ask Peter Mann if he would say a word before we proceed. Peter?
Thank you very much. I'd first like to say that my brother and my sister were unable to join us today, but they are certainly with us in spirit. And this is something that my family has been looking forward to for a very long period of time. So I speak on behalf of all of them as well. I've been surrounded with great fortune to be with amazing women most of my life, but none so much as my mom. She was just one of those people that gave you encouragement when you needed it. She pushed you when you needed it. And she often inspired not just me, but as Dr. Murray has just spoken about, so many of us. I often get asked since her passing, you know, how did she do it all? How did she pack it all into a day? And I am reminded of something she told me when I was about 25 years old. And she said, every night when I go to bed, I hope I have done enough. I've learned enough. I've shared enough. I've lived enough. And she said, every morning I wake up and I hope and expect that today will be better than yesterday. And I think you can pack a lot into 74 years when you live with that kind of mindset. And she no doubt did. It was a life too short, but it was a full and rich one. My mom's love of learning was really what made her such a great mentor, because she felt that she learned from as many as she was mentoring. And that requires a tremendous amount of understanding and listening. And she was often the smartest in any room, but she never acted like it. And that allowed for a conversation and a learning process that, as I said, kind of went from both sides. My family is just thrilled to be a part of this today. This is really one of our proudest days. We want to thank the tireless efforts of the Dalhousie Medical Research Foundation, Brian and all of his group. We want to thank the Faculty of Medicine, and I want to make a special thank you to Dr. Joan Sargent. She has had tremendous passion in this project, and my mom's name and memory quite literally permeate medical education around the globe, and Dr. Sargent has played a tremendous role in that. So we are very appreciative. Thank you. And finally, I want to thank so many of you. You've allowed for this to happen. We initiated this process, but it was with the generosity of all of you, so thank you very much. And today, this is actually the passing of the baton, is my understanding, where we are going from the Paul Cudmore Lecture to the Karen Mann Lecture. And David, Paul's son, is here today. And I just wanted to say that our family is honored to continue the legacy of improving learning opportunities in medicine for this place that we love so much and care so much about. So with that, thank you. And I'm going to pass it over to David.
I have no idea how to work this. Advance it with this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you can just use it.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Dean Anderson for the opportunity to say a few words today on behalf of the Cudmore family. The Karen Mann Lectureship in Medical Education is a very exciting new lecture series and a wonderful addition to the medical school's 150th anniversary celebrations. It also marks a continuation of a tradition of lectures in medical education at Dalhousie that started in 1978 with the annual Paul Cudmore Memorial Lecture. So that series was in memory of my father, who was the Associate Dean of the medical school at the time of his death in 1976. So we appreciate the opportunity to thank the medical faculty, colleagues, and friends for establishing that Cudmore Lecture Series and for supporting it for an amazing 39 years. My mother, Jean Cudmore, attended 37 of those lectures. Mom, please stand up and take a bow. I think there are a few others perhaps in attendance today that were at that first lecture. Jock tells me that he was there, I was there, Jean was there, and so it's been an amazing series and a lot of wonderful memories. So I wanted to say that the Cudmore Lecture Series was a great gift to our family. The lecture, which was often preceded by the Dean's Tea or followed by a dinner, became a major event. And over the years, it was attended by my siblings and many of the grandchildren. It was a time when my mother really looked forward to it because she kept in touch with my dad's colleagues and she got to keep in touch with the medical school. And for our family, it was the most important day for remembering and celebrating my father. So that's one of our get-togethers just not too long ago, a couple of years ago. I think that was between the tea and the lecture. So an annual lectureship needs very dedicated people to keep it going. And there have been many individuals over the years that, and we thank them all. I'd like to mention Joan Sargent as the former head of the Division of Medical Education, and Linda McNutt, Administrative Assistant, Special Project Coordinator. They both have been great hosts and exceptionally kind to our family. And of course, I want to talk about Karen. So Karen was held in the highest regard by our family. She was an ardent supporter of the series and along with her husband Ian, often hosted dinners. She gave very gracious introductions of the lectures, which helped to keep my father's memory alive for us, particularly for our grandchildren, for his grandchildren who wouldn't have known him. So, on September 19th, 2016, the 39th and last lecture of the Paul Cudmore series was given. The title was Developing Patient-Centered Clinicians. The brochure of that lecture identified the Cudmore series as the highlight of the year in undergraduate medical education, and it stated that the list of speakers read like a who's who of medical education. And there's a long list. Linda has it. Befittingly, the guest speaker for that final lecture was Dr. Karen Mann. So who could have foreseen on that day that a few months later Karen would no longer be with us? We were all very saddened. Our family had already been thinking around that time, and before we had some discussions with Dean Anderson, that the Cudmore lecture had had a good run, and it was the right time to pass the torch. And we had talked about it as a family. Mom was involved in all those discussions. So therefore, we were really pleased when Dean Anderson and the Faculty of Medicine announced that they were going to begin a lecture series recognizing Karen and her contributions to medical education. So, on behalf of my mother, Jean, my siblings, Sharon, Kathy, and Donald, we hope that the Karen Mann lecture will carry on for many years to come, maybe more than 39. We look forward to the guidance and inspiration that that lectureship will provide. And furthermore, we send our best wishes to Karen's family, to Ian, her children Jeffrey, Jillian, and Peter, and hope that they will find joy and happiness in remembering and celebrating Karen through this lectureship. Thank you.
I mentioned earlier that Karen's spirit will be with us in events like this because of her influence and because of our close friendship with Karen. And I can just imagine her here today as he hears this lecture from Dr. Kevin and Eva, that she'll be there making notes. You remember her impeccable handwriting in blue ink. And I always love to get letters and notes from her because of that. She'll be delighted that the first inaugural lecture honoring Karen will be by Dr. Kevin Eva. Now, Kevin is an associate director and senior scientist in the Center for Health Education Scholarship and professor and director of educational research and scholarship at the Department of Medicine at the University of British Columbia. He completed his PhD in cognitive psychology at McMaster. In 2001, he became editor-in-chief and the Journal of Medical Education in 2008. He has a number of international appointments, including visiting professor at the University of Bern in Switzerland, and has consulted broadly around the globe, including for the National Board of Medical Examiners in the US and the National Health Service Education in Scotland. He co-founded the Maastricht Canada Masters of Health Profession Education program, of which Karen was involved and interested. His contributions have been in the area of assessment of competence, selection of trainees, clinical reasoning strategy, feedback strategies and response, performance assessment, and the role of self-regulation in professional practice. He's received many international awards for his contributions to medical education, and it is a pleasure and an honor to invite him to speak to us today. Kevin?
Okay, thank you all. We all know why we're here today. I'm not going to say a lot more than you've heard already about Karen, in large part because I have to maintain my composure for the next 30 minutes. But I will just say that everything you've just heard about her reputation and influence inside the school is absolutely true for the reputation and the way that she's perceived outside the school as well. I had the great fortune of working with Karen in a number of different capacities, and as I was reflecting on what I could offer, given the great honor that I'll cherish for the rest of my career of having this opportunity to speak in her name, it's clear that the words that come to mind most readily are warmth and positivity and enthusiasm. And just an incredible contribution. So thinking of those things and how I might be able to reflect some of what she's done for the field, I was reflecting on, again, how much she's connected so many of us and how many people she's brought into the field and really launched a number of careers just by virtue of her own enthusiasm. And so what I'd like to do for my time with you today is really offer an open letter to those of you who are just starting out and are just trying to find your way into this area that Karen called home and had such an influence. For those of you who have been around for a while, I hope this will be a reminder to all of us about how important it is that we nurture and support and are deliberate in trying to help those individuals find their way and walk their path as Karen would have wanted us to. So for those of you who I am meaning to be speaking directly to, in terms of those who are just starting out, I'll just give you 20 seconds or so to reflect on a series of each of 4 questions. How did we get here? and I don't mean by bus. What in the world were you thinking? Why are you sticking around? And finally, how are you going to find your way? How are you going to find where you belong as a scholar in this field? Okay, those are the questions that I want to build my remarks around. In the interest of time, I'm not going to ask for your thoughts at the moment, but hope to hear many of them during the reception. Before I think we can even address this question of how did we get here, I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about where is here. What are we talking about when we say health professional education or medical education, which is this field that Karen called home. I've been working in the field for about 20 years now, and I still find it incredibly difficult to offer a simple definition. The reason for that is it's a field of scholarship that's influenced by countless disciplines. We heard this morning from multiple people speaking on leadership about the value of diversity. And I would go out on a limb to argue that this is the most diverse field that one is ever going to find. Apart from all the clinical versions of anesthesiology and hematology and all the other disciplines, just amongst my closest collaborators in our field, I can count psychologists and sociologists and kinesiologists and largely any discipline or any area of interest that you have, there is a place for it somewhere in education, and there's likely somebody who's working from that domain. And those individuals, as many of you will know, are completing countless activities. Being in this country, I'm contractually obligated to present this flower. I think it's been in every presentation so far today, so I've modified it, you will notice, those of you who are looking closely, because I'm not interested in talking about the CanMed's roles per se, but rather just use it as a reflection of just a subset of the activities that people might engage in and call themselves a medical educator. I think it's actually quite fitting, too, that the way this daisy is drawn, there's a small intersecting circle and many who might work in one role or another without necessarily crossing the dividing line between them. There are so many roles, in fact, that the Academy of Medical Educators, which is a UK-based organization that's been brought together for the sole purpose of supporting and building reward structures and nurturing educators in trying to define a health professional educator themselves, they couldn't even reference specific activities. Right? They defined a health professional educator simply as someone who's committed a significant amount of time, energy, and professional development to health professional education and can demonstrate that it's become an important part of their career. Despite all that diversity, there's really one thing that binds us all together, and that really is that just about every one of us got here by chance. Those of you who are in the field will recognize this phenomenon, but Wendy Hu from Australia has studied it somewhat systematically, and again, just an overwhelming sense that everybody who got into the field got here in ways that they can't even necessarily describe, but there were always these sort of random moments in their lives that led them in this direction, and that's again seemed to be the one thing that bound everybody together. I mention that in part because I want those of you who are starting out to recognize that for all the benefits that come from that diversity and that true sense of inclusivity that we have in our fields, the risk of that, ironically, is that it can create feelings of isolation. Because so many people are involved in so many different things, it can be very difficult to identify role models. We might see other people who are central or at least very active in medical education, but they don't seem to be doing what we care about or what we want to do. And it can be hard as a result to really find the right person to offer the right guidance for what you care to do. That makes it difficult sometimes to even understand, what am I doing here? What is my identity as an educator? And it makes for a reward structure that can be very unclear and very unsettling for many individuals. And that's what made me ask the second question of what were you thinking? If you haven't already, you are going to find this a trying career path. You will find that many of the activities in which you're engaged are absolutely essential. They're critical to the medical school, to the profession, to your own specialty. But oftentimes it'll feel like they're invisible. You're going to have service expectations pile up in terms of committees you need to work on, particular tasks that you feel like you're doing just because they're your role, and that oftentimes are not consistent with the valued forms or the more traditional forms of scholarship that make it easy to get promoted or make it easier to get your salary increase or all the other rewards that one might be pursuing. Because many of the rewards that come from this career that you're choosing are intangible. They're symbolic, and you'll be placed in moments where you really do wonder whether or not they're worth it, given all the strain and struggle that they might create. And this leads me to a second irony, which is that had you come into the field 20, 30, or 40 years ago, you would have found that at every meeting like this, there was an effort that needed to be made to convince people that education was a distinct and special skill set. Just because somebody was an exceptional clinician didn't make them a good, let alone exceptional educator. I think we've moved beyond that. I think we've gotten past the notion that people can do this naturally. But I label it an irony because if you think about the university more generally, a common critique that continues is that we train, recruit, and hire exceptional researchers, and then we force them to teach without any real effort at teaching them how to teach. In our circles, health professional education, things have really flipped in that we now recognize that education is a distinct skill set. But as soon as somebody puts their head above the parapet and identifies themselves as being interested in education, they're expected to be able to do everything that has anything to do with education. And again, that's not going to be a comfortable position for you when you come across that if you haven't already. Being an educator doesn't mean being able to do good education research. Doesn't mean necessarily understanding how to create an assessment system. These are all distinct skill sets that as a field we've gotten very good at, but have done a disservice to many individuals in terms of their own growth by suggesting that everybody could be exceptional at every single role that they might take on. And clinician, administrator, researcher, educator, those are all full-time jobs. If we treat them all as just things that we can do off the side of our desk, then no wonder challenges arise and you'll feel some frustrations. But getting back to the positive, given that we're here to celebrate Karen, I want you, when you feel those moments of tension, to take a moment and reflect very carefully about why you're sticking around, why it's worth it. There are many reasons that people get great joy and great reward from teaching, despite everything that I've just said. This is a summary of some work that Yvonne Steinert and McDonald did out of McGill, suggesting that we teach because we gained a lot from the people who came before us, and it's an opportunity to pay it forward, to develop the next generation. It's personally fulfilling in that many great teachers will routinely tell you that they learn a lot more from their students than they feel like they provide. And obviously there's that sense of gratification that comes from helping others as well. If you're more interested in the research side of things, I'm not going to share any data about this in particular, but just ask you to reflect on this quote. The research is to see what everybody else has seen and to think what nobody else has thought. For many of us in this room, that's a really exciting opportunity to have that capacity to collect data and think differently about some of the challenges that we face. Why we administer? With all due respect to Dr. Murray and those like him, I thought long and hard about this, and I personally can't come up with a good answer. Don't know why you do the jobs that you do. And as much as I joke about that, I actually say it intentionally as a reflection of it. Again, no one in this field has to be everything. There are people who do this exceptionally well, and I'm awfully grateful for them. But whatever your reason, I want you to remember that we need you. And I mean, we as an institution, as a profession, as a society. It's that rich tapestry that Dr. Smith alluded to this morning in terms of the diversity that makes the difference. The diversity creates a lot of tension, it creates a lot of debate. But it's that debate that moves us forward. There have been any number of important advances that often don't readily or at least reflexively get attributed to the educational practices. But we are decades ahead, years ahead, centuries ahead, depending on what particular example we think of, in terms of having assessment technologies that give us a much better indication of which physicians are competent to practice and which ones create unreasonable risk for their patients. We can look across the literature. A paper just published about a year ago showing that the socio-demographic biases that have been very prevalent for many years, for the history of medicine, in terms of who gets into the training programs in the first place, are declining. And they're declining in large part because health professional educators have made it an issue and taken steps to try to improve upon those situations and build medical schools that have greater social accountability. Here at Dalhousie, you've created a distributed medical education system that is similar to others that have cropped up across the country, and we're seeing nationally that the schools that have done that have been that deliberate in doing that, are increasing the rate at which practitioners stay in rural areas, and so it's the educators that are having a considerable influence on helping to improve, if not fix, the maldistribution problem. And lastly, let's not lose track of the implication of scale. In that, as a clinician, when you help a patient, you help that patient. As an educator, when you help a student, you help all of their patients. And so it feels much more indirect, and as I said, the rewards can be intangible and often invisible, but it is playing forward. And if we had more time, we go through many more examples of the variety of things that have improved because people have dedicated their careers to health professional education. Okay. So again, how are you going to find your way, given all these reasons for doing that? To start addressing that final question, I just want to ask one more, which is, what does education scholarship mean to you? We can look to a variety of sources to try to answer that question. The dictionary is fairly straightforward. Seems like a reasonable place to start. Like all definitions that try to be encompassing, it seems a little bit simplistic when we start thinking about all the various forms of scholarship within health professional education. Boyer famously has outlined within education circles that there are many forms of scholarship, from discovery, or sort of research type of activities, integration or syntheses of evidence, community application or engagement, and scholarship of teaching. And they each come with their own priorities and own markers of success. But as he said, in earlier times it was a bit more simple in that scholarship referred to a variety of creative work, and was measured by the ability to think, communicate, and learn. Now, that's the nub of it. As we translate that into health professional education and try to make sense of what do our deans and our department heads and our others need to think through when they're trying to determine who is successfully engaging in education scholarship, the Kame white paper that was presented a few years ago emphasized again that there are a variety of roles and activities. It encompasses both research and innovation. And they specified that it's attained through the work being peer-reviewed, publicly disseminated, and providing a platform that others can build on. Those are our goals, regardless of what form of scholarship you're engaging in. But again, none of these efforts, for me, really capture what scholarship is and what we should be encouraging ourselves towards. For me, it really boils down to three things. I'll start with the last one because it's probably least self-evident. I used this phrasing because of an editorial I found from 2008, the Journal of Cell Biology, where an individual by the name of Schwartz talked about a student that he had who left graduate school to pursue a career in law because she was tired of feeling stupid all the time. And the reason he conveyed this anecdote was to say that in most of our educational settings, from kindergarten onwards, there's a right answer to all the problems that were presented. And it's only when you get into the real complexity of science and education and scholarship more generally that you realize a lot of the problems you're grappling with, there isn't a single right answer. Or if there is, maybe nobody's found it yet. And so I put this up as an indication of scholarship because I think it just reinforces that importance of staying engaged and recognizing that we as educators, and in whatever form that takes, need to embrace the uncertainty that comes with the problems that we're fighting with. The same way that we try to encourage our students to embrace and not give up in the face of uncertainty when they're dealing with their patients. In terms of being skeptical, I'm at a point where I feel like I don't even need to explain why that's a virtue, especially the successor of this particular individual. The skepticism that we value, though, the reason for mentioning it is to say that while I'm encouraging each and every one of you to be highly skeptical in terms of trying to think through why are we doing things a certain way, or are there better ways to do it, that mindset should make you understand that it's totally reasonable and appropriate when your department head or your colleague challenges you on the claims that you want to make. That we make progress through science, through education, not by applying any particular methodology or using any particular intervention, but rather we make progress by virtue of developing better and better argumentation. Okay? And so when somebody challenges you on why are you doing it this way, or you know, make me a better case for why this needs to be improved, that should be seen as an opportunity to learn where are the gaps in the argument and what data or theory or experience do I need to develop to enable myself to better address those issues when they come up again, because they're going to come up again. And the last thing was being humble. Innovation is everywhere. As Carl Breiter said, it's only sustained innovation that helps us reach our potential. He argued that every time we do something, whether it's running a workshop, giving a lecture, planning a curriculum, it should be seen as nothing more than the most recent imperfect iteration. And this spirit comes to light when and helps us think differently about what are we looking for when we say that we want our educational practices to be evidence-based. The randomized controlled trial that we hold up as the pinnacle in the clinical world often fails to capture the complexity in the educational world. The picture that Dr. Smith presented this morning of the horse and buggies compared to the cars spread just 13 years apart in the early part of the last century reminded me of another story that Breiter tells in this paper, in that he says, back at that time, had we done the ideal randomized clinical trial of the horse and buggy versus the car, every single metric you can name, the horse and buggy would have won. It was more reliable, it was less smelly, it was quieter. Every indication would have said the evidence base is that the horse and buggy wins, let's stop worrying about the car. It's only through that sustained innovation that, for better and worse, we got to where we are today. Okay. So what I want to leave you with is the advice to say that as you're setting out, when you're engaging in scholarly application or scholarly teaching, keep in mind that your job is to incorporate other people's ideas without blindly adopting their solutions. And just to reflect on why their solutions need to be adapted to your particular context, because your context is not the same as mine. And so the simple fact that I can claim I was successful at something needs to be taken with a grain of salt as you think through what's different and what do you need to do differently to accommodate for those things. And if you accept that, then those of you who are engaging in scholarship of discovery or integration should feel empowered by the recognition that your job is to help us refine our understanding of the problems we face, not to provide the solution, because there won't be one single simple solution. I don't want to make this sound easier than it is. I certainly can't create time or money for you. Maybe your dean can. But the three things I would point to as steps to try to help us overcome those barriers, given that these sort of things that have been successful for others who've come before you, are to try to maintain focus. Don't spread yourself so thin that you're trying to be everything to everybody. Identify a community of practice, other individuals who are diverse in their own perspectives and will challenge you and hold you accountable for developing that argumentation I was talking about, and chase your passion. Again, one of the great rewards of the diversity and all the struggles it creates is that it means there is space for people to do what they want if they can demonstrate that they can do it well and that it has some meaningful value to the profession. Because I think that's the real secret, is if you're passionate about something and you pursue it in a scholarly way, then it will be impactful and you'll have the careers that you're hoping to have. I will leave it at that, and thank you for your attention.
So what a lovely thank you for Kevin. Do you have questions or comments? We have about 10 minutes here to have a discussion, involve you in the discussion. Thank you, Kevin, for laying out for many of us, as you say, even those of us in the field of medical education and medical education scholarship, sometimes have difficulty, as you say, explaining it to people when they say, what is it you really do? What is it you spend your time doing? So thank you so much for laying it out and really hopefully inspiring so many who are just entering the field or sort of halfway along and not quite sure where they're going. You've done it in a very helpful and eloquent manner. Questions or comments, please? Oh, and could I, excuse me, there's one little logistical detail. Could you push I think Jean is showing you, there's a little button in front of you. And for our I think we have participants in 2 different sites, someone in Sydney and someone in St. John, looking at our sites there. And so if you push the button in front of you, then they can hear your question too. And then once you give your question, then you can just push it again and it will turn it off. Thank you very much.
It's not a question, but I think SO Oil 60 or 70 years ago had a comment which always stuck in my mind and carried me through education and teacher education. And that was that nothing should remain any longer than the time it takes to improve it, which I think is what you're talking about in terms of sustained innovation. So anything that you're doing shouldn't be done forever, just as long as it takes to improve it.
Yeah, there's a great version of it. And we spend a lot of time trying to teach our students about the value of continuous quality improvements, right? And we're at a point now where Joan and others have done a lot of work trying to figure out how might we change the culture towards them appreciating that part of their role as a professional and as a scholar is to go find data that will help them understand what aspects of their practice could be improved, and to sort of maintain that endless cycle of continuous quality improvement. And yeah, as you just said quite beautifully, I hope a key message that comes through this is that it's more for us to engage in those things as well, if for nothing else, and just as a means of role modeling those activities that we expect to take place in the clinical environment.
Other questions, comments, reflections?
Please go ahead. Sorry, and push your button.
Did you
please.
push your?
Or I can push it for you.
I Dr. Dean will do it here. Alan Purdy, I'm a neurologist, retired, sort of. When we brought in the problem-based curriculum in 1990, under Dr. Murray and Karen, there was a sort of a saying back then: 2 things influence physicians, how much money they make and how they're taught. And so the room was full. It was absolutely full, this room. It wasn't as nice, but it was full. And they had to triangulate it. The head of medicine then, Dr. Carruthers and Jock and Karen, and a few of us were sitting in the back, and everybody had to agree it's a wonderful thing, PBL versus traditional lectures, etc. So, these things have influenced us greatly over the years. And medical educators have a tremendous influence on clinicians. They just don't know it. They don't even know they're using pedagogically good things to do. But evidence-based medicine, it suffers a little bit, as Dr. Sack has said, from not adding experience in. So certainly when you get to the level of caring yourself and others, and experience plays a huge role in interpretation of what evidence-based means, because a lot of people think evidence, we're going to have a study, and the study will dictate the direction we're going in. So in your career, what do you think about experience versus data?
Yeah, so I
Just
couldn't
an
agree-
easy question, sorry.
No, it's a great question. I couldn't agree more. This is a debate that flares up every 5 years, 10 minutes. 5 years in the literature because it's so slow to develop, but yes, 10 minutes in person. I couldn't agree more. I prefer the phrase evidence-informed to evidence-based, in part because I think it broadens the definition of evidence. You know, we're not falling into that trap that just isn't realistic in complex environments. And for our educational activities, we're not able to take a pill off the counter and know the exact dose and measure precisely what the impact will be. And so we need to triangulate through every source of information that we have available to us, whether it's empirical work, personal experience, and I guess one of the things I'm trying to remind people of and encourage them towards in this talk is that even those experience-based things, if we're going to practice education in a scholarly way, should be explored in a manner that can be shared with others and meaningfully translated to others, not, again, through necessarily systematic, carefully controlled studies, but through trying to be deliberate in terms of understanding what is it about this system or this experience that's leading me to have these experiences, and how might I guide others so that they get a leg up and can live somewhat vicariously through that.
Can I ask a supplementary question?
If you push your button.
We brought in PBL, right? It was the Harvard, New Mexico
There's
thing.
McMaster, thank you very much.
Yeah, well, I don't understand McMaster, so, and now we have case-based learning. I always enjoyed the PBL because it was discovery learning. It was grinding. It took forever. Well, they just get to the next stage, where PBL is mainly teacher-directed rather than student-directed. And when we got into PBL and they all sat around with their computers looking at Wikipedia and not interacting in any way, it was very disturbing to clinicians to see that, or not showing up for lectures. Or at Yale, we hear they have a pajama curriculum where they stay in their bed all day long and look at their computers. Give me a thought as an experienced medical educator. What's best, problem-based learning or case-based learning? Because I think we've made a mistake.
I'm pausing as I think about how to phrase my response.
Okay, I'm leaving soon.
What's best is to not ask the question of what's best. That there is no one teaching method that is best, that will rule them all. We hear a lot in education, that's just the latest trend, it's just the latest fad. And so obviously said in a derogatory way, at least when said in that tone. But I would shudder at the thought of an education world where there weren't new things being tried, there wasn't an innovation being put forward, and there wasn't enthusiasm generated for just doing new things because they're new and might solve some problems even though they're going to create other ones. Right? For every intervention, there are going to be side effects and unintended consequences, and I think what I would hope for health professional education scholarship as a field is that the purpose is not, again, to prove that CBL is better than PBL, but rather to better understand what are the factors that influence when and why different activities are being successful for different students. If you look at problem-based learning, team-based learning, case-based learning, most current version of this is the flipped classrooms. There's a trajectory in the literature where somebody puts forward an innovation and they play with it a bit, and then people start doing studies, and eventually it leads to a number of empirical works that show, in fact, there's no difference in the learning outcomes. And then people argue, well, we should abandon it. And it's not the case in my mind that we could ever get to the point of saying this is better than that, but rather the value of doing the research is to figure out what are the limitations and what are the benefits that we can achieve if implemented in particular ways.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Do we still have time? Or
So I, as a junior faculty, one of the things that I sort of, I don't have a fully fleshed out question yet, but the tension that I noticed was just that there was the serendipity slide, which I can relate to, and then at the end there was the focus slide. And I know for a lot of us who wear many hats, a lot of which are through serendipity, there is that sort of tension where, I'm trying to figure that out. Like, how much can I focus at this point, and how to go about that. And anyway, it was just, this is an open question really for me. So I was curious. When I see that focus thing, it always makes me a little nervous because I know that it makes sense to do that, but I also...
And there's just too much that's exciting, right?
Right.
This is the trap we all fall into, is that you get enthusiastic, and again, you want to take on some of those additional opportunities because it seems like it'd be fun or impactful to do that. What you're getting at is precisely why I labeled it as a tension, right? It's not something that's going to be resolved. It's a wicked problem if Susan's still here, that the type of problem she was talking about earlier, where it's under tension because there are forces pulling in both directions. And if we ever solved one of them, the whole thing would just fly off the side. So I can't stand here and say, thou must do any particular thing, but just mention that at the end as a way of reminding you that it's important to be strategic and to recognize that for those of you who are interested in education, you're going to have many more opportunities than you can ever possibly follow through on. And so it's worth taking the time to dabble as much as you want, but do it in a way that's helping you figure out where are you going to have the biggest impact and where are you going to get the most satisfaction. I was just at my last comment, and then I'll shut up. But we were just at a wellness conference a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of focus on burnout and all the harassment issues and everything that are major problems for us right now. And it's becoming clear from that literature that the stress and strain and busyness and variety of roles that people in this world have to fight with, that's not what's causing burnout. What's causing burnout is the lack of meaning associated with those things. Right? People can handle being busy and being stressed as long as they see the value in doing it. And I guess that's the short form of the long-winded answer I just gave is if you feel like you're trying to play with many things, that's great, as long as you're feeling that it's valued and that it's the way you want to be spending your time rather than because you feel like you're going to miss out on something if you don't.
Yes.
This is more a reflection on what might be semantics, but as someone who has been very grateful for opportunities to chase my passion and pursue my dreams, when you said chase your passion, I'm thinking that there's an implication in that you're not going to get there. And I think of having your passion chase you. And that way you're always propelled forward by something that you're being driven by. And maybe, it's just semantics, but maybe there's more promise of success.
Right. It's an interesting reverse that I'll have to give some more thought to. Likely reinforces my point that this is just the most recent imperfect iteration of this talk that I could give. But yeah, your point's well taken. That all I was trying to reflect in making that comment was that the things that do get you out of bed in the morning are the things that it's wise to make a priority. Again, there are people among us who get energy from the wicked problems of administration and others who just shake their head and can't even understand why one would draw energy from that. And that's all I was trying to reflect in that bill. Yeah, thanks for the comment, though.
Yes, Ian.
Joan?
Oh, there's some.
Yes. A voice.
It's a voice from above.
Yes, it is.
I'm really glad you don't sound like Karen.
I know. Where is it coming from?
I just wanted to say thank you very much for your talk today. It was a talk I wish I'd heard 20 years ago, but the problem was at that time there was no such entity to describe as far as developing a career in medical education, because there wasn't one. So you entered it through serendipity, responding to contextual issues, but the serendipity created the opportunity or created the experience that subsequent opportunities allowed you to then focus on. So I think that the serendipity is actually quite key to the career development in building the skills and knowledge and experience you need to get to the point of focusing. I don't think you can start focusing. I realize that's an academic pressure to do that early, and there's lots of value from that academically, but from a personal career development, particularly in a community setting, I think it's extremely difficult. But at some point you do have to focus. The question is, when is that? And I think that's the rub.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's I certainly didn't mean to imply that serendipity was a bad thing. That is going to continue. There's no way we'll be able to control that. Despite many schools trying to create more deliberate pipelines for those who want to become education leaders, that generally they still discover it as a career option by chance in one form or another. And I think that is one of the ways that again, those of us who have been around for a while and those of us who have the opportunities to control levers or redesign the reward systems can play is to create deliberate strategies to enable those truly fresh newcomers to experience a variety of things and try to discover where they want to focus. We have a clinical educator fellowship that we run at UBC where senior residents come in and spend 2 years with us 80% time. And part of that activity comes along with an expectation that they'll contribute 300 hours per year to undergraduate and postgraduate education in many forms. And so we very deliberately tried to construct things so that they get a wide breadth of experience so that by the end of the 2 years they have a better sense of, at least for that first stage of their career as education leaders, where they want to prioritize their time and energy.
Thank you, John. Ian.
Kevin, I had another question from perhaps another perspective. I mean, I grew up as a basic scientist, handling a lot of facts, posing hypothetical questions and then trying to prove or disprove them, and then came into an area in medical school where in anatomy, both gross anatomy, developmental anatomy, and histological anatomy, and I think for me and being absolutely blown away, having a second life. When problem-based learning came in. And it wasn't just because of my relationship with the leader of problem-based learning. That helped a great deal. But it was seeing what one had been trying to do in a different way. But I found, and perhaps this may be of help, I found it was very difficult talking about it and asking somebody, how do I do this? How do I go from this fact-filled life? And for example, in anatomy, you would stop sometimes think, what am I doing? This is just a list of facts. How does how does the elbow work? That's what I really want to do. And how can you show somebody that that's how the elbow works? What happens if this? But talking your language is very difficult, I think, for particularly a basic scientist. And it's because I think Joan and I have had discussions, and Karen and I have had discussions, and we sometimes seemed just to miss each other. And so I think I've struggled to find out, how do I approach this?
Yeah.
What language do I use?
Yeah. Yeah, and it is a different language. It's a perfectly fitting metaphor. The first thing you make me want to say is, we've been talking a little bit about focus to this point, and the fact that one can have a productive second or third or fourth life in this realm is an indication that I don't mean to say that once you've decided on your focus that that's it forevermore. That the opportunity to play in different areas is one of the ways that I think we stay rejuvenated. But the bulk of your comments make me want to emphasize more the importance of, again, institutionally and culturally creating a community of practice who are going to come together and have the opportunities for those conversations and stay engaged long enough that they can figure out where are we missing each other when we're talking across purposes. There are many schools, UBC hasn't done, but many schools have created teaching academies for that purpose. People who have come forward in one way or another as being educationally focused and giving them space to work with one another, to share their own perspective and try to find some communal language so that it creates a greater opportunity for the school to push in an understood direction. When I was training during my graduate time as a basic scientist as well, we had weekly lab meetings that included clinicians and psychologists, and every week we would discuss something that probably wasn't relevant to 80% of the people in the room at any given moment, but having them in the room helped us understand one another and understand the perspectives, and then when it did become our turn to talk about something that we cared about or that was relevant, again, just created that sort of communal relationship where you knew that it was a safe space and you could work through those difficulties without them becoming combative.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think given the time, we'll move on. I want to say a special thank you to Kevin and just remind folks that there is a reception. Oh, you think so? Did I put my foot? I think there is. We'll go outside the door and see. Kevin, don't go away. Hey, I haven't finished thanking you. I only just.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Come on back. I just wanted to say that I think it's just so fitting to have Kevin as the inaugural. Whew. No, I'm the one that has to get through it. It's tough, isn't it? The inaugural Karen Mann lecture. Kevin and Karen have been friends for years and years and years. And so, that's one reason. And I think you can just see the way that Kevin has presented, the very elegant way, elegant and eloquent way that he answered all your questions and your reflections, that just shows what a true thinker he is, and a true educator, and again, a true colleague of Karen. So I'm sure she's up there smiling. And I want to tell a little anecdote. It might embarrass you, but
I should leave?
No, I want you to stay here. I don't think I've told you this. This was, let me see. It must have been very shortly when you were just beginning. It would be about 20 years ago, maybe in very early in your career. And I had gone, and Karen and I became, as you know, I'm Joan Sargent, for those of you who don't know me. If there's anybody here who doesn't know me, sure, sorry about that. And I went to the Association of American Colleges meeting, I think it was in Washington, and that was it's a big education meeting. And so, and I think it was the first time I'd gone, and Karen was sort of, taking me around, by the hand, introducing me to people and so forth. And we went into a research in medical education session. And I was saying, oh, who's speaking? And she said, oh, it's Kevin Eva. He's quite young, but but he's an up and coming star, and he's going to go far. And so I just wanted to share that with you, because I'm sure that Karen is up there smiling down and is truly delighted that you're the first, the inaugural speaker. Thank you. Thank you. You can go now. You can go now. Great. Thank you, Kevin. Really nicely done. And again, I just want to reiterate the thanks to DMRF, to Brian Thompson, to Peter Mann, and brother Jeff and sister Jillian for coming together and building this fund for everyone who's been able to contribute to it, and for enabling Karen's legacy to live on in this lectureship. Thank you so much. We are so we're just delighted here at the medical school to have that. So thank you so much. Thank you too to all the friends and family who've come. And I think that we'll remember this as a really warm and rich launching of the Karen Mann lecture series, and I think she'd be very happy. And I just love having that picture up there of her smiling down on us. So with that, thank you, and we'll proceed out into the lobby and see if indeed there is a reception out there. I invite you to join us.